2 days before my wedding, my parents left a note on my door.
I didn't scream. I didn't argue. But 48 hours later, everything changed.
2 days before my wedding, my parents left a note on my door. The wedding is off. Expect a call from our lawyer. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. But 48 hours later, everything changed. If you love emotional stories, shocking betrayals, and silent revenge that hits deep, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell, because some stories don't need screams. They just need silence. My name is Eva Sinclair, and 2 days before my wedding, my parents left a note that shattered everything. It was a thick cream envelope, the kind my mother only used for holiday cards and legal threats. It was taped to my front door when I got back from the final florist meeting. My fingers tingled as I peeled it open. I could already smell trouble, like cologne and cold paper. Inside was a folded sheet of heavy stock. Eva, the wedding is off. You'll hear from our lawyer, Mom and Dad. No explanation, no greeting, no love, just that. My hands didn't shake. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood on the porch for a long time, the autumn breeze curling around my legs, carrying the scent of wet leaves and dry betrayal. Mason was inside, sitting cross-legged on the floor with our seating chart and a half-eaten slice of pizza. "Babe, I think your cousin Mark is secretly trying to bring a date. He RSVP'd twice." I closed the door quietly behind me and slipped the note into my coat pocket. "Let him bring her," I said, my voice steady. "We'll figure it out." Mason looked up, sensing something in my tone. "Everything okay?" I nodded, smiled. "Just cold outside." That night, while he slept beside me, curled like a comma, I stared at the ceiling and let the silence crawl into my chest. I didn't tell him, not yet. I needed to understand what this was, what it meant, what it really was about. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't about Mason. It never was. It was about control. My parents didn't approve of Mason. He wasn't prestigious enough, not Ivy League, not a lawyer or hedge fund heir, just a kind, hard-working man who made me laugh when I forgot how. They warned me before. Subtle digs, backhanded compliments, phrases like, "You sure he can keep up with you?" Or, "He's sweet, but he's not our kind." I thought they were just being difficult. Now I realized they were being deliberate. They waited until the last possible moment, knew we were counting on their financial support for the venue, their venue, a historic estate they owned through the family trust, the place I grew up visiting, imagining my wedding under the old sycamore tree. And with one note, they tried to pull it all away. I should have been furious, but all I felt was empty. Like someone had opened my ribcage and walked out without bothering to shut the door. The next morning, I made coffee like everything's fine. The kitchen was filled with that sharp, rich smell of dark roast, the sunlight cutting in through the blinds in perfect stripes. Mason was humming a Fleetwood Mac song as he buttered toast, completely unaware that our entire wedding was technically canceled. I still hadn't told him. It wasn't that I was hiding it. It was that I needed a minute to breathe, to think, to remember who I was before my parents tried to erase me again. I took my coffee to the balcony, wrapped myself in my thick cardigan, and watched the neighborhood begin its day. Joggers, dogs, garbage trucks. Life didn't pause just because mine was spiraling. I pulled the note from my pocket again. No emotion, no explanation, just pure dismissal. And then my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Hope you understand this is for the best. We'll speak soon, Mom." Hope you understand? Like I had made a scene, like I was the problem. I stared at the message for a full minute. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I typed, deleted, typed again. In the end, I didn't send anything. I let the silence do what words could never manage. That afternoon, I called the estate directly, spoke to the grounds manager, Tom, a man with a thick neck and a soft heart. "Hey," he said, "you okay? Your mom called this morning, told us the event's off." My throat clenched. "Did she say why?" He hesitated. "Just said there were irreconcilable differences." We were all surprised. Everyone here's been prepping for weeks. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the caterer, the florist, the DJ. Every one of them had already been contacted by my parents' assistant. Each one politely said they were sorry to hear about the cancellation. No one had even bothered to check with me. They had erased me from my own wedding, just like they had tried to erase me from every milestone of my life. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at my hands. The ring Mason gave me sparkled on my finger, unaware it had been rejected by people who were supposed to love me the most. The door creaked. Mason leaned in. "Everything okay?" I looked up, and finally, I told him. He listened, wide-eyed, then quiet. No interruptions, no outrage, just a stillness that made me love him more. When I finished, he sat beside me and whispered, "So, what now?" I looked him straight in the eye. "We get married." He blinked. "How?" I smiled. "We'll figure it out. But first, I need to send something." I opened my laptop, pulled up my files, and began drafting the letter that would change everything. The document was only 1 page long. I kept it simple, precise, just like they taught me. Funny how all those years of watching my parents weaponize formality now came in handy. I wrote in clean legalese, not emotion. 2. Janet and Richard Sinclair. Termination of estate participation and family trust ties. Effective immediately, I hereby withdraw from all current and future participation in Sinclair estate events, venues, holdings, and family trust agreements. This includes but is not limited to the usage of Sinclair property for personal or professional events, as well as access to the family fund. Any inquiries may be directed to my attorney, whose contact information is listed below. With clarity, not contempt. Eva Sinclair. I didn't send it immediately. Not yet. I printed 2 copies. One for the mail, one for a small white envelope I plan to deliver in person on my wedding day. Because yes, there would still be a wedding. Not at the estate, not under the sycamore tree I once adored, but somewhere real, somewhere mine. Mason and I called his aunt, who owned a modest lake house 3 hours north. It was cozy, quiet, and most importantly, available. She cried when we asked. "Of course, sweetheart," she said. "I always knew they didn't deserve you." We kept the guest list short. No distant cousins, no work acquaintances, no one who needed to be impressed. Just people who loved us for who we were, not for who we could pretend to be. That night, Mason and I lay side by side in the dark. "Are you sure," he asked softly, "about cutting them off like that?" "I'm not cutting them off," I said. "They made the first cut. I'm just choosing not to bleed anymore." He reached for my hand. We stayed like that until sleep found us, intertwined in stillness, not chaos. 2 days later, on what should have been our rehearsal dinner, I walked into the post office with my letter. As the clerk weighed the envelope, I watched the screen blink. Destination, Sinclair residence. Delivery estimate, 48 hours. Perfect. By then, it would all be done, and they'd receive something far more devastating than my anger, my freedom. The lake that morning was still as glass. Not a ripple, not a breeze, just a silver reflection of the pine trees and the gray-blue sky above. Mason and I arrived before sunrise, holding hands, wrapped in scarves, our breath visible in the chill air. No makeup team, no champagne towers, no photographers with drone shots and ego. Just us and truth. Mason's Aunt Ruth had decorated the small wooden deck with fairy lights and baby's breath she'd picked herself. There were only 12 chairs, lined in 2 simple rows. The smell of fresh pine needles mixed with cinnamon from her kitchen, where pies were already baking. It was everything my childhood self would have scoffed at. It was everything my grown-up self needed. Our friends began to arrive slowly. Kate, my best friend from college, in a black wool coat and tears in her eyes. Terrence and Lisa from Mason's work, holding thermoses of coffee. Even my old piano teacher, Mrs. Landon, who had once whispered, "You are a storm trying to behave." They all hugged me the same way, not tight out of excitement, but gentle, like they knew. Clara showed up too. Yes, Clara, my sister. I hadn't invited her, but she came anyway. No grand entrance, no dramatics, just a navy coat and a somber smile. "Can I stay?" she asked. I looked at her, this woman who had spent most of her life benefiting from my silence. I nodded. "For once," I said, softly, "just sit and watch." She did. When the officiant asked, "Who gives this woman?" no one answered. And I smiled, because I gave myself to a man who never asked me to shrink, to a life that didn't require permission. The ceremony was short, barely 15 minutes, but every word was chosen. Every vow felt like a promise written in marrow. When Mason slid the ring on my finger again, I whispered, "Thank you for staying." And he whispered back, "Thank you for walking away." After the ceremony, we didn't toss a bouquet. We didn't cut a cake. Instead, we danced slowly to a single song playing from a Bluetooth speaker. Just us, the lake, and the people who mattered. And as the sky turned gold with the setting sun, I slipped the second envelope, the one with my letter, into Clara's hands. "Please drop this at the Sinclair mailbox on your way home," I said. She looked down at it, then back at me. "What is it?" I smiled. Closure.
2 days after the wedding, I was back in my apartment. Same white walls, same sound of traffic out the window. But something was different now. I was different. I poured tea instead of coffee, jasmine, not espresso. I let the silence hang around me like a blanket instead of a cage. Then, around 4:13 p.m., my phone buzzed. First, a call from a number I didn't recognize. Then, a text. "Eva, we got your letter. Call us. Dad." 10 minutes later, another one. "This is absurd. You're acting like a stranger. Mom." And then, finally, "Don't do this. You're still our daughter." Still. As if love was a contract I was breaking. As if they hadn't torn it up with a one-sentence note 2 days before the most important moment of my life. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a private folder on my desktop labeled Truth. Inside were photos from the wedding. Just a few. No filters, no professional edits. Just warmth, realness, faces that weren't posing, but laughing, crying, living. I attached them in an email with no subject line and no message, just one attachment. Then I hit send to both of them. That night, Clara called. She didn't start with hi. She started with, "They're freaking out." About what? About losing you, she said. About the trust, about the board seats, about everything. Not about the wedding? She hesitated. Mom said it looked small, but happy. She's right, I said. It was both. Clara went quiet for a moment. Do you hate me? She asked. I didn't answer right away. I stood by the window and looked down at the street. The city lights were just beginning to glow, steady, indifferent, beautiful. No, I finally said. I just stopped expecting anything. Can I fix it? No. Another pause. But you can do better. That part's still open. I hung up and sat in the dark, with nothing but the hum of the heater and the beating of my heart. I felt no satisfaction, no victory, just peace. It was a peace that didn't come from proving a point. It came from not needing to anymore. They invited me to dinner. Not a casual dinner, a formal one, at the Sinclair house. Linen napkins, crystal glasses, roast lamb on fine china. The usual show when guilt needed disguising. I went, not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted closure. When I walked into the dining room, it was like stepping into a memory I no longer belonged to. The wallpaper was still the same, white with soft gold florals. The table centerpiece was elaborate, as always, like they were hosting royalty instead of a daughter they tried to erase. Mom smiled like nothing had happened. Dad cleared his throat. "We're glad you came," he said. I sat down and didn't touch the wine. "I'm not here to eat," I said. "I'm here to listen, for once." They exchanged glances, then Mom began. "You have to understand, we were trying to protect you from making a mistake." "Mason isn't a mistake," I said. Calm, clean, like cutting silk. Dad leaned in. "We just thought you could do better, with your background, your upbringing." "My background was you ignoring me unless I was winning something," I snapped. "And my upbringing taught me that love comes with strings so long they strangle." Mom's voice trembled. "We wanted your wedding to reflect your worth." "It did," I said, "because it reflected truth, not status." There was silence after that. Then Dad said quietly, "You've cut yourself off from the family trust. You understand what that means, don't you?" I nodded. "It means I'll have peace." Mom leaned forward. "Eva, we built this family for you and Clara." "No," I said. "You built a business, a brand. I built myself." Her eyes welled up, but no tears fell. "We miss you." I didn't smile. I didn't soften. "Then maybe you should have invited me to my own wedding." I stood up. "Are you disowning us?" Dad asked. "No," I said. "You already did that with a note." Then I turned toward the door. Mom whispered, "We're still family." And I paused just enough to say, "Family isn't who you dine with. It's who would sit with you even when the table is empty." I moved. Not far, just enough. A small loft near the marina, bare brick walls, high windows, and morning light that touched everything like a quiet blessing. No family portraits, no pressure to perform, just space, air, silence I chose, not endured. The day the last box was unpacked, I sat on the hardwood floor with Mason beside me, eating takeout from the box like college kids. There was no chandelier, no heirloom silverware, no heavy curtains trying to block the world out. Just us. And that was enough. I took time off work, not to escape, but to realign. I read books I'd abandoned years ago. I went on long walks without earbuds. I took deep breaths that didn't feel stolen. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling without realizing it, and that's when I knew. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. One afternoon, Clara showed up. No call, no warning, just her and a bag of pastries. "I'm not here to fix anything," she said. I stepped aside, let her in. We sat at the little kitchen island. She watched the water through the window. I watched her. She finally whispered, "They're still spinning. I think they expected you to come back." "I know. They don't understand this version of you. This version of me doesn't require their understanding." She nodded. "They're still talking about the trust, the estate, the legacy." I sipped my tea. "That's all they ever had." "And what do you have now?" she asked gently. I looked around. Sunlight, laughter echoing from the street below, a man who loves me without condition, and peace so deep it didn't need defending. "I have everything, Clara," I said. "Everything that matters." She didn't cry, but she held my hand like someone who understood, for the first time in years, why I left, why I stayed gone, and why I was never really missing at all. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from my parents again, not directly. Clara told me they were rethinking things, but that only meant they were scrambling for control now that I'd stopped playing their game. They weren't mourning my absence, they were mourning their power over me, and that was fine. I threw a small dinner one Saturday night, nothing extravagant, just 6 people who'd stood by me through it all. Mason grilled on the balcony, Ruth brought her famous apple pie, Kate brought her laughter, and me, I brought the woman I'd fought to become. The dining table was mismatched, 2 borrowed chairs, 1 stool, and a bench we found at a yard sale. And yet, it felt like royalty. No one performed, no one competed. Every seat was earned, not assumed. At one point, Mason raised a toast. "To Eva," he said, eyes shining, "who built her own table and let us be part of it." The others cheered, and I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere you forgot existed. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the candles had burned low, I sat alone with a glass of wine and looked out the window. My phone buzzed, a message from Mom. Just 3 words: "We were wrong." I stared at it for a long time, not out of shock, but because it didn't hurt anymore. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed to be heard by people who never listened. I locked my phone, set it down, and looked around. This was my life now, unapologetic, undeniable, unborrowed. And in that quiet, with no applause and no audience, I felt it. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. The kind that doesn't ask permission, the kind you earn by walking away, then never looking back.